about where you are actually. Where are you on the planet?
I live on Maui, in Hawaii. So I've lived in Hawaii since I was about 11. My family moved out here. We moved to Kauai, which is a smaller island, and now I'm on Maui, which is a long story of how I got around to Maui. But I've been here for about 9 years now. Yeah, 8 years. 8 years. Yeah, in October, I think.
And what do
So
you like? What do you spend your days doing? Like, what's your thing?
well, I have a lot of things. My main thing is glass blowing. So I have my own business that I started when I was a teenager, which is hand sculpting glass beads in a torch. So you start with rods of solid glass and melt them in a torch, and it's all about like shaping and layering and heat and gravity and all of that. So it's like glass blowing only on like a very tiny scale. It's super detail oriented. So I do a lot of glass pieces that I make, like sculptural pieces, a lot of fantasy inspired pieces, and then I incorporate them into jewelry, and I sell that wholesale to local shops and mostly glass galleries actually. And then I sell online. And then I also do glass blowing out of two different studios here, which is like larger, like actual glass blowing with like the long metal pipes, and you're dipping it into a bowl of molten glass, and then you're actually blowing it and shaping it. So I do that as well. So I do rent studio time at two different studios, and I make that type of work, and then I sell that out of the glass galleries as well. So that's like my main thing that I do, at least on the income side of things. And I started that really young, and probably because I was unschooled. I think I made my first glass bead when I was 14. And then we moved to Colorado, and then we moved back to Hawaii. And it was my friend's mom who was into glass bead making. So I'd go hang out with them. I'd stay for days at a time, sometimes at their house. They lived up in the mountains on Kauai. And I just like became obsessed. So when I was 16, my mom was like, okay, this is for real. Like, this isn't just like a little passing fancy. Cause I was always into crafty stuff, like anything, making little things with my hands, making pretty things. I was always into all the crafting stuff. And so when she could see that this wasn't just like a phase, and she was like, oh, this is a legit passion you've got going on here. Like, it's not going away. She took what little money she had, because she was a single mom at the time, to myself and my younger brother. My older brothers had moved out. And she bought me my own equipment, and it was a really big deal. It was a lot of money, for us at the time. Um, but that's who my mom is. And so I set up my own studio with my friend, and we were selling our jewelry, our little handmade jewelry, at craft fairs and farmers markets. And I would just spend hours, her and I both, she was homeschooled, and we would just spend like hours and hours just obsessing and just sitting there on our torch, and we'd be chatting or listening to music. But like, I would, even when she wasn't around, I would spend whole days just completely absorbed in my craft. And so by the time I was like in my 20s, I was like an experienced glass bead maker. And I was the youngest one I knew. And my friend, it wasn't really her thing forever. She phased out and went into other art forms. But for me, it stuck as my true love. And yeah, I think if I'd been in high school, I don't know if I'd have discovered it in the first place. And if I had, I don't think I definitely wouldn't have had the time or the energy to put into something like that. When I'd get out of school, I'd want to just like chill out, zone out, and hang out with my friends, like all my other teenage friends that I knew at the time. But I could still do that. Like they would get out of school, and I'd go hang out with my friends, but I'd have already had 4 hours put in on the torch, just developing my craft and learning my art form and developing myself as an artist and finding my style. And I'm pretty much self-taught, because I didn't really have any formal instruction in the torch. So I kind of figured it all out myself. And we didn't really have so much in the way of like YouTube videos then either. Like now you can go on YouTube and you can like look up glass bead making, and you can take like a million different tutorials and classes like free online. But we didn't have that. That's how it started. And I tried some other things along the way because I was like, I don't want to just make jewelry forever. Like I had some idea that I wanted to be some great something and be really impressive to the world and kind of prove myself as like an unschooler, which had to do with pressure from my dad's family. Was very like, and my dad himself too. Like my parents were not in alignment. They split when I was really little. And my dad was really like, you need an education and you need to go to college, you need a career, you need a degree. Like you need a plan B. Like he just saw my glass as being like a hobby that was cute, but not a career choice. So there was a lot of pressure from my dad and my dad's family to like become something like legitimate in their eyes. And I let that influence me to some degree. But luckily, I always had my mom at my back going like, just follow your heart, honey. So, I'd get swayed from time to time and I'd think I needed to do something else, but I always ended up coming back to glass. So when I was in my 20s, I took it on really as if, well, like, this is my thing. This is what I do. I don't like anything else enough to stick with it. That was the only thing that I really like devoted myself to and like stuck with. And I still am. And it grew. It took a long time and it was really, really hard. And there was a lot of really rough patches for sure. But I stuck with it and it's paid off. I mean, it paid off even when it was hard, just because I loved it so much. Like I realized that it's something that I would pay someone to let me do. So the fact that people pay me to do it is like amazing. And it's been incredible. I have a really sweet life here now in Maui, and it's totally supported by my glass art completely.
I find that really interesting because I've got 4 children, and one of my daughters, my 9-year-old daughters, has always had strong tendencies towards craft and art.
Mhm.
And just the other day I was doing something. I think I was on like a call to my mum or something, and my daughter came in the room and took some paper, and I just said to my mum, oh, she's off drawing again. She's just coming to get some paper. She's probably just going to go and do some drawing. And actually she wasn't doing drawing. She was just doing a YouTube tutorial, and she was doing paper craft and cutting out different shapes and then sellotaping them together. Anyway, I don't really know. I don't really know what it was, but I just know that like her whole life is consumed with like there's paper everywhere and there's pens everywhere and there's paint and there's glue and there's scissors and there's chopped up bits of
Who
there's
knows?
just stuff everywhere. Half and some of it's like half done
Yeah,
projects
yeah.
and things that she'll come back to, and things that she's finished, and things that she's like she's like cardboard boxes are her thing at the moment, and she just like stealths them away. We
Yeah.
can't get a cardboard box in the house and without her like saying, oh, it's mine, I've got a plan, I'm gonna do something. um
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's
Well, and
yeah,
how
that
amazing, like
fascinates
that
me.
people don't value that. Like that's like so many adults look at those kind of activities and see them as being um like, what do you call it? Just not productive.
Mhm.
Not productive, not useful. It's not contributing to the child's like long term, or their future or whatever. Like we look at child's play as being like frivolous in a way, like extra, like on the side, like unnecessary, instead of it being like the work, like that is their job, that they're working on something. Like your daughter is working on really important things. Like to her, that's her whole world right now, and she's developing like a million skills in one. Like I can look back and remember, like I can now, like someone will compliment me on a particular skill or something, and I can look back and I can see like how that got developed and nurtured along the way, and valued and allowed, because I wasn't taken away from my little projects, my little arts and crafts that didn't mean anything to anyone. But I wasn't taken away from that. I wasn't distracted. My mom saw that as valuable. And it's like with your daughter, it's like she's allowed to explore this thing that is very important to her. And she's developing so many tools and skills that are most adults wouldn't notice or see. Like things that you can't even describe, that have to do with the way that she's seeing shapes and colors and the ingenuity, like she grabs a box and she's seeing what it could be. She's got some possibility that's popped up in her mind, which is like, it's more than just creativity. Like, no, ingenuity. Like she's figuring out, who knows? She's exploring mathematics and physics and aerodynamics and like a million other things that people just don't realize, because adults have these categories in their mind. Like they've been trained to see learning and in subjects. So they don't see when there's like 10 different subjects, all where they're so used to distilling things and processing them down to a particular subject and calling it by this one particular name. Like, what are you talking about? All these separate things. Like they don't see the things separately. They see it as one whole thing. And when we allow them to continue that, it's like, we don't have to. It's not necessary to distill things down and separate them into these categories. And adults like want to be able to do that so they can measure and label it, but that's not necessary for learning to happen. Learning will happen without that. And adults are really doing that only for their own, to placate their own fears. It has nothing to do with the actual development of the child, because it's proven over and over and over again that that's totally unnecessary to distill things into these separate categories. Not that there's anything wrong with that, if that's what's happening, if that's coming from the child and they want to explore a very particular category, there's nothing wrong with that. But especially when they're young and they get interested in, they're doing arts and crafts or whatever it is that they're into. We don't have to do that to the thing that they're interested in, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it doesn't need to be distilled. It doesn't need to be analyzed and separated out so that you can judge its learning value. Like, I think that's the thing about a lot of adults that just irritates me beyond, is like, just stop it. Like, stop analyzing what your child is doing and what they're learning from it. It's not necessary. And it takes a lot of the magic away. Just trust that it's happening, and people so often are like, oh, my child is doing this. Oh, they're learning this and they're learning this and they're learning this out of this thing. And I'm like, actually, you don't know what they're learning out of that thing and why. Why are you trying to analyze it? Just to placate your own fear. It has no actual benefit other than to make you feel better about what's going on. And if you need to do that for yourself, that's okay, but don't put it on your kid. Like, let them be free and all have everything mushed up and mixed up. It's totally fine. It doesn't only like take away the magic of life for them, it takes it away for you. You're no longer actually experiencing what's going on. You're no longer being connected to your child or being in that moment with them, witnessing and experiencing what's actually happening. You're like stuck in your own analytical mind games of what you think they should be learning and trying to fit what they're doing into your preconceived ideas of what should be happening. And then you miss it. You miss everything. You miss all the magic that's happening right now.
It's an interesting point as well, that we like, you can look at your child and like you say, like adults in particular do start to pick apart, what are they learning from this, what are they doing, but we can never actually truly know.
No,
that, like, there's no way of us actually, I could say, well, my child might be learning their colors, or they might be learning to hold a paintbrush, or they might be learning to paint a flower, or how to use scissors, but you can't actually ever truly know what they're learning.
No, and the problem with trying to figure that out, I mean, it's fine to do it out of fascination. Like, sometimes it's just fascinating, like, wow, I wonder what they're getting out of this, and to like kind of observe and contemplate. But when you're doing it out of a need to control, or like not control necessarily, but just to keep track, like when you're doing it out of a need to keep track, then I feel like you're missing out on the moment. But also, it's like, there's so often this disconnect between what you think they're learning and what they're actually learning, because school-minded adults are so very often occupied with the academic side of things and what their children are learning academically, that they tend to step over or not notice what their child is learning psychologically and emotionally. And that comes oftentimes, I feel like it affects the way in which adults try to teach Like even when, so like, for example, I remember talking to this one mom one time, and it was about like the whole teachable moments thing, which, oh God, if you get me started. But she was talking about her daughter came to her and asked her what time it was. What time is it? And she turned it into a teachable moment. And she was like, do you see the clock? And here's this hand, and here's this hand. And if this hand is here, then she turned it into an opportunity to instruct her daughter in something that her daughter did not show any interest in, did not ask to be instructed. And to me, that's extremely disrespectful and invasive. If I ask you a question and you like, oh my God, if my boyfriend did that to me, I don't have a boyfriend right now, but you ask him to do something for you, or you ask him a question and he turns it into this whole other, like we call it mansplaining, but adults do it to children all the time, adult splaining. It's so awful and it feels awful. And so what happens is, like, you might think you're teaching your child how to tell time. That's what you think you're doing. But to your child, that's not what they're learning. Or maybe they're learning that a little bit, but what they're actually learning is, my questions don't matter. What I want to know doesn't matter to my mom. The only thing that matters is what I know, is the knowledge that she wants to give me. I don't matter. What I want doesn't matter. The reason I want to know what time it is doesn't matter. So oftentimes the child will come up with, they'll decide something about themselves, about the world, about you, that has nothing to do with what you're trying to teach them. It's like, I don't matter. And you don't realize that you're teaching your child to believe that they don't matter. You think you're teaching them how to tell time. So it's like, I feel like there's a huge disconnect between what we're trying to teach, what we think is being taught, what we think is being learned, and what's actually going on an emotional and psychological level. And that's like that's where I get super fascinated. And I look into that, like when you say, don't interrupt, you're not teaching them not interrupt. You're teaching them that what they have to say is not important, that what they have to say doesn't matter to you, that what they have to say is just not as interesting as what this other random stranger you're talking to has to say. You're teaching them all kinds of emotional and psychological things that you don't even realize. Time out. What are we teaching them in a timeout? That you're all alone, that when you have big feelings and big problems, you should go isolate yourself. You shouldn't talk to anyone about it. You shouldn't get love and affection. You need to be alone with your problems. You need to think about how awful of a person you are. It's not what we think we're teaching them.
Yeah, we had an incident in the park the other week. So over at the moment here, it's the summer holidays. So when we go to the park, there's a lot of families there who are normally in school. And it was really upsetting. My daughter got really upset because there was this little boy, well, little, I mean, he must have been maybe 7 or 8, on the swing, and he was calling his mum, come and push me on the swing, come and push me on the swing. And she said, no, I'm talking to my friend. I'm not going to come and push you on the swing now. And it just escalated. Like, he just got really more and more upset and more sort of, just requesting, mum, please push me on the swing. And he was getting more and more agitated. And the more agitated he got, the more she kept saying, well, I'm definitely not coming now, because that's not how you asked me nicely. And I'll come over when you've calmed down. And it just escalated even more. And my daughter got really upset, and she was saying, why won't she come and push him on the swing? He's really upset. He wants his mum. And she, so not my 9-year-old, this was my 6-year-old, and she just couldn't make head nor tail of it. And it was really upsetting to watch. And I think because most of the time we have, our lovely little community of people that we hang out with, that's not a regular occurrence for her to witness those things, and she just couldn't understand it at all. And it was almost like she was like having like empathy for him. She was getting really upset that he was upset. It was a really so talking about emotional things, it was a really big emotional thing for her to even just witness.
And that that kind of thing, like those situations, I see those situations happen, and to me, I'm looking at an established dynamic. It's not like this one moment where this mom responded in this way. It's like, oh, there's an established dynamic there where the child is also behaving kind of strangely, due to there already being set up this weird mind game between the parent and child. So, there's a whole lot of different ways to handle that situation. And it's all about the motivation and where you're coming from and the connection that you have, the relationship that you already have established with your child and how they're going to respond to that reaction. So, had they had a different relationship established, it might have been totally fine. Like, oh, I'll be there in a minute, honey. Can I just finish my conversation real quick? I do want to come push you. And then it could have been a totally different reaction from him. It could have been like, oh, it's okay, mommy. I'm going to go on the slide instead. Like, you just never know. It has to do with the established relationship that's going on. And if you're being genuine, because the kids can tell. If you're just saying don't do that to teach them something, oh, they're going to show you. And so it's so different when it's like an authentic no from a genuine place of like, I really don't want to do this with you right now, and I'm really sorry. They can sense when it's genuine, when it's authentic, or when you're just trying to train them. Children don't respond well to training.
Nope. No, they don't. I wonder, so what, I mean, it might be worth mentioning that, I mean, I know you've sort of mentioned it, but that you as a child were unschooled. So you are, you and your siblings were, I assume your siblings were as well.
Yeah.
Would that be right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So with this in mind, and all this chat about relationships, and what are your adult relationships like in your family, like with your siblings and your mum
Yeah.
in particular?
So we've got a kind of complicated family in the sense that like my two older brothers and I are from the same two parents. And then my parents divorced, they both remarried, and they each had another child. So I have two younger half siblings. But I grew up with my mom and my three brothers. And my little sister is my stepmom's. So it was a very, very different, she's a little bit more like a cousin. So I always just think I have three brothers and consider myself having three brothers and being from a family of four. I love my little sister, but we never lived together. We weren't raised together. We had different moms. It's a totally different experience. My two older brothers, I was 1.5 when my parents split up. And by the time I came along, I was the third one. And so my mom was a lot more secure in her philosophy. And she kind of just stopped interacting with my dad's family, which was extraordinarily critical and really awful in so many ways. So I had a very different experience than my two older brothers because they had a lot more interaction with my dad's family, a lot more pressure, a lot more trauma, actually, a lot more trauma in that area. And also because my mom was very, very young. She had my brother when she was 20 and she didn't know what she was doing. Like she didn't have a plan. She wasn't like, we're going to unschool. That like totally came like little by little over the years. So my older brothers had a very different experience and they're quite a bit older than me. So my oldest brother, Garrett, and I, we're good. We're close. My second brother, Clay, and I, we're not very close. And he's really kind of gone off into more of a corporate kind of world. And he's very successful. And he has he went and got a degree and he did all these things. And but we have a very different mentality, very different lifestyle, very different belief system. So my mom and my younger brother and I were the ones that are like, my younger brother and I were always total buddies, and the three of us actually all live on Maui. So we're the ones that are really tight and close. And my brother lives up the road. My mom lives on this property, on the lower half of the property here with me. We both rent on the same property. So yeah, family relationships, there was a lot of other factors, there was step parents and lots of other extended family and influences and things like that affected all of us in different ways. But I feel like I got it really good because being the third one, my mom was just a lot more confident, a lot more secure. She was a lot more relaxed. She wasn't as fearful, She had much more confidence. Yeah, just confidence
I
and
think I can relate to your mum there.
yeah.
In that, like I said, we've got 4 children, and with our first one, we've always unschooled, and that's
Mhm,
always been our maybe our goal, maybe.
mhm,
But in the beginning, I was probably less confident, with my first, less sure about what we were doing. It felt um it felt almost experimental, but we were sure about what we wanted to do, but maybe how that actually was going to work out on a day-to-day basis um, was less certain. And then we had the second one. My 2 eldest are actually quite close together in age. It's only 20 months between them. Um, and then but then, like, by the time we got to the third one, we were in our stride.
yeah,
That confidence, we had started to see, yes,
yeah,
this is what we want. This is
mhm.
I don't like using the term working, but
Right,
we're crafting
right.
this life that
Totally
we
work in
wanted.
progress, yeah, and
We were.
the edge had gone, like, the edge
Yeah,
here had dissipated, and
yeah,
you
and
were
then
much
we
more
had the fourth, and that's like,
yeah.
it feels like plain sailing. It feels like,
Actually,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
uh-huh,
we're yeah, plain sailing now. So I can really yeah, I can relate a little bit there to your
yeah,
to that
yeah, there was just,
side
like,
of things.
my older brothers had a lot there was a lot more pressure and focus on them. My oldest brother was the first grandchild on both sides of the family, and my dad's family is a very how do I even say this? Extremely critical, judgmental, and righteous. And so my mom choosing to do anything differently than like the family way was like a big deal, was a really big deal. And it was very judged. I mean, to the point where like my grandma called CPS on us, and CPS showed up at our door because she was complaining that we were neglected due to not being sent to school. My dad and my stepmom took us to court to try and force us to go to public school, and that didn't work, luckily. But to those extremes, to the point where they're taking legal action to, and actually, my mom was afraid she would lose us at times, and so there was a lot of fear and pressure, and my older brothers got the brunt of it. They were older, they remember. I was so little, I have barely any memories of those times. I was like 3 when we had to go to court. Like, I don't, but to them it was like they were 7 and 9, and that was like hugely impactful. And so they had a lot of fear instilled in them from my dad's family, from my grandparents. Like, my grandparents were
Mm.
always like hounding us and testing us, and always expressing so much fear and anxiety over whether or not we would be okay. And that gets to you as a kid, that totally gets to you, especially when you're alone with them all weekend and you don't have your mom there being like, that's bullshit. Don't listen to them. You're fine. That fear from your own family members, from your own grandparents to be terrified for you, it has an effect on you. It had an effect on me, but it was like so much less than what my brothers got. So I think and that's something that I talk to moms about often, is like how to deal with family members and grandparents and things that are that critical and harsh, and that fearful and concerned. Um, and I remember my mom telling me that my grandma, that it was just fear, and that she really loved me and she cared about me, and so she was afraid for me, and that she didn't understand, and that it's not her fault that she doesn't understand, and she comes from a very different time and a very different way of thinking, and this is what was normal to her, and it's very scary, and that different is very scary, and she just doesn't understand, and it's not her fault. And it kind of gave me this sense of like, not everyone's going to understand you, and that's okay, and it's okay for them to be freaked out and fearful about that. That doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong. So somehow she was able to communicate that to me when I was really young, and it helped. It really helped me have an understanding and not take their judgment and fear on myself so personally. But I think my brothers just had so much more saturation in that it was much harder for them to get through. And they had a much stronger sense of wanting to prove themselves, and also maybe a bit more worried about themselves in the world, like if they were going to be okay. And I remember having some of those fears and doubts as well, like my grandma's voice in my head, like, how are you ever gonna, you know, oh, you're never going to be able to do this and this and this if you don't go to school. And how are you ever going to learn this? And how are you ever going to the point where I started to have those questions myself. Um, but then as I got older, I started to see how ridiculous, how ridiculous that was. And, I remember being self-conscious about like my handwriting. And then I remember like I was babysitting somewhere and I saw someone's mom had sent a birthday card and it was like on the fridge. And I remember seeing her handwriting and also the way that the sentence was like put together and just being like, what? Like this person went to school, you know? And then I started to see it everywhere. And I started to notice like how awful most people's handwriting is and how like the poor grammar and the poor spelling that I would notice and just be like, wow, these people went to school. Like, I guess I'm fine. And you start to realize that so many kids are forced before they're ready, and their handwriting is permanently damaged for life because they're doing it before they're actually ready, physically or mentally. And so I was allowed to do that when I was interested, when it was comfortable for me. And I don't have perfect handwriting by any means, but it's totally legible. At least it's totally legible. Um, and then the writing and everything. I mean, spelling's never been my strong suit because spelling just doesn't make sense at all. It's about memorization. It's not about there being any kind of um, like practical or reasonable formula. There's no rhyme or reason. So that one was a bit challenging for me. But writing, when you're allowed to read for 6 or 8 hours a day through your teen years, writing tends to come quite naturally. Once you have that much absorption of literature, and I was reading things like I read almost every Shakespeare play because I loved Shakespeare and I just wanted to, and I did, like when I was like 13 or 14 or something like that. So those kinds of things I think are interesting when people are concerned over. Um, and then the concern gets put on the child and the child gets concerned for themselves and they become self-conscious, and then it does affect their abilities to execute these kinds of tasks because of the self-consciousness, which was instilled by the fear from the fearful people in their life. So whenever people talk about that, for one thing, explain to your children that people are afraid due to their own insecurities. It has nothing to do with them. It's not true. And it's just because they don't understand, and different is scary. And then also, I wouldn't hesitate to remove a toxic influence from a child's life. I would not hesitate. And no, I wouldn't let my kids hang out with that grandma that I had. Never. And my mom wouldn't have if she'd had a choice, but my dad had joint custody.
Mhm.
And that's what we did when we were with my dad. So also, the other part about that is that it's not entirely a bad thing either for me. Like I can say it was a negative influence or whatever, but at this point in my life, I'm grateful for all the hardships because I feel like it's broadened my understanding and given me the ability to communicate and talk about these kinds of things and share these experiences. So I can't say that even these, kind of like anything in life, you can't really regret anything that happened because it's gotten you where you are now. And every experience contributes to your understanding of yourself and the world and everything. So help your child learn to understand that it's not about them, that it's about that person's fear and insecurities, and your child doesn't have to make it about them. And it doesn't have to be dramatic or a big deal. You can just be like, that's just grandma, whatever. She's just scared. Don't worry about it. You know? So there's lots of different ways to handle it, and there's no right or wrong way. And your children may experience self-doubt like I did, and they may experience that fear of wondering if they're going to be okay. But who doesn't? School doesn't give you that confidence either. In fact, oftentimes it's quite the opposite in school. I mean, I talked to so many people who just thought like high school just destroyed them, just destroyed their confidence and their feeling like they were ever going to be okay in the world. Even on a more emotional and psychological level. I had some of that fear just due to like, will I be adequate academically? But that's minor compared to the fear that a lot of people experience coming out of the school system, where they're just like, I'm not okay as a human, due to the social constructs in school and due to the hierarchy and the whole authoritarianism and all of that. They're just like, they're broken spirits coming out of school versus like a little bit of concern about whether or not they're going to be able to do math properly. Like, that's not a big deal. To me, that's not a big deal. That's easily fixed also. Like, any of the academic stuff, even if your child, by the time they are a teen or in their 20s, even if they are lacking in certain academic departments, easily remedied. Absolutely. If I didn't know something, I learned it. No problem. It's never too late. So what if you don't learn, the whatever age appropriate academic activities at that age? You can do it later. Like, there's no missed window of time to learn math. There's no like, oh, you didn't learn to spell when you were 9. You didn't learn to read when you were 5. You'll never be able to learn to read. It's not the case. You can learn to read at any point in your life, at absolutely any point. So if your child at some point discovers, oh, I don't know how to do this thing, and I need to know how to do this thing because this is what's going on now, it's required in my life, they'll learn that thing. That's not a problem. But the emotional and psychological traumas, that's a different story. When you're little and you feel like you don't matter and you have to learn what other people want you to learn because you can't be trusted to know what you want and what's right for yourself in your life, that sticks with you. That is not easily remedied. Those beliefs of like, I'm not good enough, I can't trust my own instincts, I can't trust my impulses, I don't even, like, those beliefs stay in you and they're very, very hard to unlearn later in life. You can learn to read and write, do math, do whatever. You can learn that at any point. You are never too old, it's never too late. But when it comes to those personal, those psychological and emotional beliefs about like who I am and what I'm doing here on the planet, feel about the world around you and how you feel other people see you and what you feel you're capable of, like, those beliefs get learned very, very young, whether you want them to or not. And then they're extremely difficult to root out and rearrange later in life. I mean, why do you think we have so many people on like psychological, we've got people in therapy, we've got the massive, massive mental health crisis all over the planet. I don't think it's going to matter that much if you know how to read, if you're so depressed you can't get out of bed. So I say, let's take care of our children's mental health and the academic learning will take care of itself, because that was the case in my life.
I think we see that, like you say, all over, and it's one of the reasons I think people find what we call like the deschooling process really hard, because it is so ingrained, and just when you think you've sorted like one layer out, like there's something else comes along and you, like what about this, and then you start applying it to yourself and realizing that all these things that you're trying to help your children with, so not helping them but supporting them when they're choosing their own passions, and you start picking that apart and thinking, well, hang on, I never get to do what I want because and you suddenly realize, because you've been told what to do your entire life, and then you don't even know what you want. Then you have to start really digging deep into, well, what do I want? How do I even find out what I want? And that whole, and like you say, the mental health has in the last few years that's really come to the forefront. The mental health crisis in our societies as well. And like you say, like, you can't, like, school doesn't make any guarantees academically either. Like the example you gave about writing, there aren't any guarantees academically in school, and so even when we're questioning those things for our children, like what if they don't have legible handwriting, what if they can't do maths, what if they don't take to reading, or don't get the exam results they need. But actually school doesn't even guarantee those things either. And if we're prioritizing mental health and things like that, like you say, they can always go on and do their biology exam when they're in their 20s, if that's what they want to do. It doesn't have to be in that time frame if they're not ready.
Right. No, I mean, we have this idea, adults have this idea of how learning happens, and when learning happens, how learning happens. And we have this idea that it's this very like set course. And, you know, this needs to happen before this needs to happen. And then you learn this, and then you learn this. And it's this very like step by step. It's a very linear process. Yeah. And it's just not the case. Like children, when they're learning, when they're allowed to learn naturally, it's a lot more like a tree. You know, it's like, oh, put a leaf here. Oh, wait, no, a branch. Oh, wait, no, a root. You know, and it goes like in all these different directions. And sometimes it's little bits of growth in all directions at once. And sometimes it's these massive shoots of growth in one direction, or a little bit here and then a little bit there. And then it's just like anything's possible, and every child's going to be a little bit different. Some of us will absorb ourselves into one thing for a great amount of time with absolute determination. And then some of us will just do little bits here and here and there and this and the other. And if you have this preconceived notion of like learning has to happen like this and like this and like this and like this, you can break a child's natural learning mechanisms. You can disrupt that, and then it gets thrown off, and then they're unable actually to learn very well anymore, because their natural learning mechanisms have been damaged in a sense, because we have this idea that this is how it's supposed to go. And the other thing about that is it's the learning certain things at certain ages. And we have so much evidence and actual human beings that have proven this wrong for over and over and over and over and over and over again, that learning doesn't have an age requirement, that there is no point at which it's like everyone has to learn this at this certain age, otherwise, and that's just not the case.
Or you have to stop learning when you're 18, like you're done. Or or you can do a degree, but then you can stop. You're done.
Yeah.
You know.
And that school is the only way to learn.
Yeah.
And that being taught is the only way to learn. We have this idea that you have to be taught how to learn. That learning is like this, and it means this, and you have to have a teacher, and you have to have resources, and you have to have all these things. But if you were to like scratch away, like just tear away like everything you thought about learning and children, and if you could just be in the mystery of it and the fascination of it, like it's incredible and beautiful what you'll discover, you know, things that you never even dreamed existed or were possible in how learning happens and how children develop. And it won't end anywhere. You're never going to figure it out. You're never going to be able to figure it out and be like, oh, this is how it works. And that's the problem, is that we're all like, so many adults and teachers and people in the educational field are constantly trying to quantify, you know, and determine this like end all solution. And that's just never going to be the case. It's never going to be the case.
One of the things I found really fascinating, so people that are listening to the podcast will know, but I'm actually an ex-teacher. But one of the things that I found really fascinating was that as a teacher, it was about that, you know, we used to chart children's learning by giving them a test every term, and then you drew it on a little chart, and everyone expected their learning to grow like at this steady rate, which it never did. And they all expected all the children to grow at learn things at the same thing at the same rate. And it never occurred to people when they were analysing this data that the problem might be what we were expecting of the children. And it never, it occurred to me that we were dealing with human beings. We weren't dealing with machines. Like, you can't just change the dials on the machine and change the output. You know, we were actually dealing with human beings, and sometimes there'd be children in your class that had extreme family circumstances going on, which of course is, or in my opinion, of course is going to affect other
Yes.
areas of their life. They're not going to be concentrating in class. They're not going to be engaged in what you want them to be engaged in. They've got other stuff going
Yeah,
on.
they might be in an extreme emotional state, and
Or they might just darn well hate what, like have zero interest in what you're trying to do, because you're dealing with human beings, and there was no leeway for that whatsoever.
it's funny to me that we would think that they would operate, that we could have them learn, like you were just saying, on this very linear and all at the same pace at the same age, when they don't even develop physically at the same pace at the same age. I mean, you're going to have kids taller and shorter and kids going through growth spurts, and you know, um, you look at a 6-month-old baby, and some of them are bald and some of them have hair and some of them, it's like, of course they're going to develop differently on the inside as well as on the outside, because our brains are physical. They are it's a muscle, it's physical. And so there's going to be a million other factors going on. There's going to be your heritage and your genetics and then there's going to be your lifestyle, and possibly expect anyone's brain to function like any other or develop at the same speed, same rate, same time, any of that. Some are going to make huge leaps and some are going to go steady, and some are, it's just going to be all over the place and all different. To me, it's just as ridiculous as saying, like, how tall that person should grow. That's like completely ridiculous. Like, we all know that that's insane. We're going to stop this person growing at this height, or we're going to force this person to grow higher. We know that that's impossible and ridiculous, and yet we're trying to do it with children's mental development, but it's not any different. So that part is totally ridiculous. And then the part about trusting, I mean, I know that most people have been trained not to trust their own natural impulses. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust life. We don't trust each other. So of course it's going to be extremely difficult to let that go and to start trusting your child. And my mom likes to say that, you can't allow your children to be free unless you free yourself, and that it's really a journey of self-discovery, and that you do have to do a lot of hard personal, emotional, psychological work to root out, where these motivations and these beliefs and where they came from, and just discover like what's true to you and what was adopted, what was taken on, what was instilled in you by others and by your environment and by society, and what's actually true and natural for yourself. That's like the real work of motherhood, according to my mom. It's like,
Well, I agree with that. I have done so I've done several presentations this year, and they've all been on trusting your children, but they all end up with trusting ourselves, like because we can't, if we can't trust ourselves, then we can't understand how we can trust our children.
It comes down to some other tricky subjects, because trust and freedom, and I was just talking about this earlier, actually, where does your freedom end and your child's freedom begin, and how to respect your child's freedom without violating your own. And so that comes with the trust thing as well. And it's like, people go, oh, trust my child, and it's like, okay, so we're just going to trust children, but what does that really mean? Because some people just take that as a blanket statement, and they're like, oh, we're just going to trust children, whatever. And then there's also the factor where you live in a household where there's multiple people, and you have to learn how to function together as a community. And maybe you do have to have a lights out for everybody, and you work that out together as a community, not one person being an authoritarian, and it was kind of like, well, we have young ones that need to go to bed, and you guys can't, we can't all be, and we'd work it out together. And it was never like a communist dictatorship. It was a more of a democratic, finding those ways to navigate that together as a family. And that's totally fine. And you might find, it was like always allowing there to be room to evolve and to change and adapt and experiment with everything. Because of the relationship that she established with me, it was okay the times when and how she said no. And it was because of the relationship she established. It was because of the trust and the respect that she built between us, that had it be okay for her to step in sometimes and help us navigate challenging situations and possibly remove a negative influence from our lives. But it wasn't just like, it's my job to keep you safe and you can't do that. It wasn't like that. It was very much like, I see that this is really affecting you in a negative way. And like, she would help us to see that it was
Yeah.
negatively affecting us. I remember when I got into reading, and from the time I was like 12 to 15, I was reading like 6 or 8 hours a day. And I would just be like sitting on the couch like all day. And when I would stop and I'd come have dinner, I was very strange. Like, it's not, I was living in a fantasy world all day. I was not connected with my family. I wasn't based in reality. And my body was all twitchy from sitting in this weird position. And I remember a few conversations with my mom of her being like, I love that you're into this and you're enjoying this, but I've noticed the effect that it's having on you. Have you noticed, like, this is what's happening? And I would notice things and I would participate in the conversation. And then it would be like, what are we going to do? But how can I support you? Like, I see that you're really irritable and uncomfortable after reading for a certain amount of hours. Like, would you like some help and support in that? Like, what can we do about it? How about if I tell you when it's been 3 hours and we can go outside for 10 minutes? I'll go for a walk with you. And so it was never just this like, this is wrong, I'm changing it for you. It was always this like, this cooperative communication kind of thing.
I think
And
people find it difficult to understand how that's possible, how you can have a parent-child dynamic whereby when you have advice or input into something that you see happening with your child or something that's going on in their life, that it doesn't become invasive or intrusive or dictatorial, but that actually you can have a conversation, like almost like a peer-to-peer conversation with your
Mhm.
own child, and thrash those things out together, um like you were saying, respectfully,
Yeah.
um but because of the work that you've put into the connection and the relationship that you've got with
Mhm.
your child, that has established and been built upon over years, um but that actually you're not you're not um you're not doing that, you're not putting the effort into those relationships in order to have that influence
No,
over
no,
your child in future years. That's not the
not
purpose
with an
of it. That's
agenda,
not,
right?
yeah, exactly.
It's not with an agenda to influence
Yeah,
later. Like, literally, my relationship with my mom, like, it wasn't that she established a particular kind of relationship so that. It was
yeah,
very much about, this is who we are right now. And everything my mom did is about honoring who I am right now, not trying to get me somewhere or change me or fix me or improve me, or so that I would be something someday, or so it was like always about letting things develop and unfold naturally and being curious together and not having this plan or this idea of how you think it should go, but really being open and allowing things to grow and unfold. And your children can feel when you have that agenda coming at them, and if you're trying to establish a certain dynamic so that you can have a certain kind of influence, and they will smell it on you and it will not be pretty. They will fight against that in numerous ways. To me, it's like, I'm always looking at any negative behavior. To me, is a cry for connection. It's always trying to repair the connection. Children are just constantly showing you wherever you're disconnected with yourself, with them, with the present moment. That's what they're doing. They're just showing you where the disconnection is. And it's beautiful. You're getting an opportunity to see where your disconnection is and reconnect to what is, to your child, to yourself, to reality. Is spend time every day with very conscious connection to your child. Like when you wake up in the morning, instead of running off, like she was always running off, I was like, why don't you just take 20 minutes, lay in bed with your kid, like connect with them, look in their eyes, give them affection, like read a story, sing a song, like whatever it is, try and give more of this positive connection. Even if you're connecting for a negative reason, you're still connecting. And they will take any connection they can get. And if you're not giving it to them in a positive way, they will find a way to get it from you. And even if that means they're getting it in a negative way, it's still connection. It's still life giving and energy giving to them. It's their sustenance. And every child is going to be different and every parent is going to be different. So when people like, sometimes people come to me and they want this like formula of like how to unschool, like, and I can't give you a step by step, like this is how my mom did it and this is how you handle every situation. You might handle the same situation differently depending on the day, depending on the child, depending on your mood, depending on your, like you just don't know. And what worked yesterday might not work today. So being like, it's, to me, it's like all about just letting go of everything you think you know about parenting, about learning, about education, about child development, letting go of everything you think you know, and being an infant yourself, like being totally innocent and allowing curiosity and experimentation. That's what will guide you, and that's what will guide your child. It's just the connection, the heart connection with your child. And you can tell when something's off and you can help try to correct it. You don't always have to have a conversation about it. Sometimes it's you that needs to shift something in yourself, and you'll watch your child transform without ever having to communicate anything to them. That happened between my mom and I a lot. It's happened just kind of like that's interesting. Something's irritating me about this. What is it? And it's like, oh, I'm not totally allowing this, or I'm not, whatever it is. And I can be like, and let that go. And I watch the behavior transform. Every child and parent relationship is going to have a different level and kind of connection and different amount of different ways of connecting. But I really feel like we can't talk about unschooling without talking about that, because I feel like that all of that, what we just talked about, is like helping maintain a human being's natural state of balance and well-being, is what allows us to learn naturally according to our development. It's what allows us, when we're healthy and in balance emotionally and psychologically, then we can develop mentally in much broader and faster and more productive ways, because we're not preoccupied with emotional lacking and psychological dissatisfaction, which can take a huge amount of energy and attention, and can kind of, like we were saying, like break up those natural learning pathways, and have you unable to focus and or find your passion or be interested in something. It's like, I know when I'm so I feel like when you provide that kind of groundwork for your children, then the learning will just, you don't even have to worry about that. That's why I put all the focus on the psychological and emotional well-being of children and how to take care of that. And that's what's going to have the biggest impact. So I don't like focusing on this. How did you learn how to read? How did you learn how to, it doesn't, that's not, let's take care of what's really important. And that stuff will work itself out. That's all on top of, to me. And if you try and put all of that on top of a shaky foundation, if you don't have a solid foundation, and it's not ever going to really be very strong or very stable. So that's why I like to go into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, people always want to know about the learning, and like you say, like I'm always trying to like actually, yeah, the learning's great, and I know that there's a lot of unpacking to do there from what you know about your own learning experience, but actually the foundation, the thing that you really want to focus on is this over here. You want to focus on, your child's mental health, your relationships, all those things that you were just talking about. I think what I'm going to do is wrap it up really nicely by saying that it's actually what time is it? It's 10 to 10 in the evening here. And so talking about having some sort of limits and, mutual agreement in our family is that my younger two, who are tired, but they go to bed at the same time as me. Actually, my husband doesn't sleep, that's another story, but they go to bed at the same time as me, which is kind of nearing now. Really, this is when we sort of start winding down, and we do some of that sort of quite intense connecting stuff actually in the evening, because my husband's around as well. So we are that's what we're going to do now. That's why we're going to head off and do that now. So I'm going to read stories with, snuggle up and read stories with one of them, and my husband will snuggle up and read stories with the other, before hopefully yeah, we do some other things as well. But like you say, it's not a blueprint. Like not everyone's going to do stories before they go to bed. You know, that's what we do.
Right.
One
Right.
of my daughters likes listening to music as she goes to sleep, and the other one likes listening to we've got like some children's meditations, so she listens to those, and you can't blueprint that on somebody else's life. That's just what we do, and that's how we do it.
Yep.
And as I said, my two younger ones, my daughters, they go to bed now. My older ones are actually 14 and 12, and they're pretty self-sufficient actually now. They sort themselves out, so they'll go when they're ready. But I thought that was quite a nice way of wrapping up that conversation actually. Just I've loved spending this time chatting with you, and it's been brilliant, so thank you very much.
Sometimes it's, I mean, that's, unschooler here, favorite way to do things.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Summer.
Thank you. Have a great